The R2 is 2 rows of seating, whereas the R1S has 3 rows of seating, and pricing is significantly lower. The R2 is supposed to start around $45,000, whereas the R1S base price is just under $80,000. So,
all right, guys,
smaller,
let's do this.
Significantly more affordable.
Just got to get this going.
And indeed, that's exactly Rivian's strategy. They told me, think of it as the R1, the R1S SUV, and the R1T truck. Those introduced Rivian to the world, and now the R2 vastly expands Rivian availability to many more people. So let's take a tour, shall we? On the outside, you can see the overall profile and style of the R2 is very similar to the R1S.
All right.
A similar boxy look.
U-channel.
A lot of the same design. And that's also true in the front, where you can see the kind of characteristic Rivian oval running lights up front. It really does have the same general look. It almost looks like an R1S, but sort of at 7/8 scale, just kind of a smaller, more scaled down version. And of course, Rivian told me that was very intentional. They said basically all of the mid-size and electric SUV competition sort of looks the same, at least in their mind. The same sort of teardrop shape, the same kind of general design cues, and that includes raising up the belt line and lowering that window line, kind of tapers off, and the result is less visibility, less glass, less boxy, and this vehicle is supposed to be kind of an antidote for all that. It retains the Rivian muscular, boxy, aggressive design that we saw in the R1 models, just now brought to kind of a different market segment. Now, with that said, the R2 does actually have some pretty significant differences on the outside of the R1S, but they're subtle. Let me show you. A big exterior change, and probably the R1S has a traditional rear window, but the R2 has a trick roll-down rear window in the tailgate. You walk up to the car and you tap these 3 little lines on the side, and the rear window automatically rolls down, which is pretty cool. You tap those 3 little lines again, and it rolls right back up. The benefit is you can drop
special events, Rimac.
Or when you're driving along, you can lower the rear window with this little button, kind of the overhead center console. Press that, it goes down automatically, and so you can have
What's happening? 14 hours. Oh man, are you serious?
The roll down rear window too. Now,
all right, well,
cool,
we can do money
some
runs.
changes that have to come, specifically the location of the rear wiper, which you can see is mounted inside of this sort of holder below the rear window. Now, in the R1S, the wiper is mounted on the window itself, but if it's going to roll down, it can't also hold a wiper, so it gets moved here. Now, in some cars, they put it up at the top, but Rivian told me, click to the design here, even though it's very boxy, there is still a little bit of teardrop shape up the top, which is sort of hidden by this spoiler. And Rivian said this little teardrop shape on the rear end is actually so much important for oil, and so the rear wiper couldn't go up there. They needed this to go in. Instead, the wiper is located down here, and when the water gets into the little wiper holding area, believe it or not, there's a drain that actually sends water out below the tail light, and that's how it runs outside the car in here, which is interesting. And here's another interesting design detail. The R1S is pretty much only sold in North America, but really stands for the R2 V8 going for vehicle. And in order to sell it in Europe, pedestrian safety requirements mean that the frontal area has to be able to kind of compress a little bit in order to provide a safer thing for a pedestrian to hit. Now, in the R1S, there's a step line right here at the front, and that means kind of a hard mounting point, which doesn't comply with those European pedestrian safety requirements. In the R2, you will notice that the hood is sort of folded down over a little bit more, especially noticeable on the side compared to the R1S, and that is a small design change that allows this vehicle to sell globally. Now, also interesting up front, there's 3 more little lines. You can see in the very front of the car, you tap your finger on those.
Not paying attention.
The front trunk at Rivian is generously
sized.
All right,
let's close Photoshop.
Front trunk, but it's very small, sort of only there to check a box. Actually, a useful, practical, additional storage compartment extra beyond what's in the rest of the car. Pretty neat to see that. Worth pointing out that this front trunk, it opens up automatically, but if you want to close it, that's manual. You push it down and shut it closed. And since we're up here, one rather interesting little quirk. If you go into the little side trim on the windshield, you'll notice a little disturbance right here. That is the Rivian Gear Guard guy. He's like a little Rivian mascot that initially appeared
Guard
as
your
ears
guard
system, and now he's in a bunch of other stuff, including on the side of the windshield, a fun little quirk. Also, an interesting quirk on the side, you can see the Rivian logo is on this little panel here. That's not just a corporate logo, it's also the side turn signal. This is another requirement. Vehicles have to have a side turn signal. Well, this one does, and it lights up Rivian every single time it blinks, which is kind of
we don't need this.
Another interesting quirk. Inside the charger
Discord.
door, You can
fine.
see
Oh, it
there's
needs
a
an
little
update.
maze,
Probably that's
which
why.
apparently you can
All right.
solve. It looks rather challenging, but it apparently does actually have
Do
a
this one
solution.
again.
A maze integrated into the charge port door. That's kind of bizarre and quirky, but this is kind of a bizarre and quirky car. Now, since we're talking about the rear end, that part of the car has probably been the most updated compared to the R1S. You can see a big change is that the license plate has been relocated from kind of the center in the vehicle to down near the bottom. And beyond that, some other kind of stylistic upgrades to the rear end. It's pretty easy to distinguish the R2 from the R1 if you're looking at the back. Now, also just coming out back here, there is an integrated tow hitch. You pull off this cover here below the license plate center, and you can see there's a tow hitch down in there, so you can use the R2 to tow. This actually hauling things around. The R2 is fully compatible with the cool roof rack system that Rivian introduced in the R1. They sort of clip into place, incredibly easy to use and move and change sizing. Those fit on the R2 as well. So if you're already in the Rivian universe, you won't have to get new roof racks for those here. One thing you might be especially curious about with this car, though, is the color. What exactly is going on? Why is it silver and orange? What is this? Well, it's a wrap. It's not a painted car, and this will not be available to consumers buying the R2. Instead, Rivian has chosen to wrap these early pre-production R2 models in this kind of bizarre and attention-grabbing wrap, just to kind of distinguish it from a true production car. I want to make sure people who see this don't think that this is like an actual production-ready car. You can see there are some panel gaps that don't really line up. Throughout this review, you might notice a few buttons that don't really do what they're supposed to. This is a true pre-production, not ready-to-build vehicle, and this wrap is intended to reflect the fact that this isn't really the final form, so don't see this and think that it is. Then, on that subject, Rivian also hasn't yet announced full pricing for this vehicle with all the different versions or all the different colors and options. So another reason for the wrap, they're not ready to show off exactly what color all the R2 models are. That information is supposed to come out in March, closer to when the R2 goes on sale, which Rivian says will be later in the spring. And here next up, we move inside, where there are a lot of interesting quirks. But let's start with this getting in. Like other Rivian models, the door handles are flush with the body until you unlock the doors, and they pop out. And from there, it's pretty easy. You just pull them, open up the door. Now, in the driver's door, there is an integrated flashlight, much like in Rivian's R1 model. It's one of the characteristic Rivian touches they left out. But apparently, it doesn't have to be a flashlight. You know, a hand warmer, if you want to have that in there and always kind of charging so you can warm your hand, which is a pretty cool idea. But anyway, next, let's talk interior. There's a lot to cover, and let's start with, well, it's pretty impressive in here. I'm actually shocked by this interior because even though I know this car is a lot less expensive than an R1S, it really doesn't.
Are you serious? I'm not going to do that for 700.
The layout, the design, it's really
We need it later.
Really high quality and does a great job of kind of mimicking the look of the Big Brother R1S without obviously the cost. It's quite an impressive interior as you just kind of glance around and touch stuff and look at the materials. It's nicely done. And there's quirks. Let's begin with the glove box. You can see it opens right up, pretty standard. There's a latch. You don't have to go into the center screen to open it. It's kind of nice. But there is also a center glove box. You open that, the center console is pretty normal. You're looking at storage in there like most cars have. But in the front part, there are two pull-outs in the front. One is the cup holders. They pull out. You can put your drinks there, pretty standard. Below that, you also have a compartment that pulls out, kind of a drawer that you can use for storage. And in fact, Rivian told me this is sized to perfectly fit a tissue box. After some feedback from their customers, wishing there was a place that was sized to perfectly fit a tissue box, they designed exactly this for the R2. I also like the rather clever storage situation on the door panel. You can see there's your typical door pocket, which even has an indent at the front for water bottle storage. And then on the top, there's actually a second storage compartment, kind of two door panel which adds to the practicality of the door. And you can also see on the door panel there is a button that you press in order to open the door. No traditional door handle, it's electronic. So you push that, the door pops open, and then you push it open the rest of it. As for other quirks, let's move on to some interesting controls.
5270 for that money run. That's not bad. This is definitely better than the last Just Drive Syndicate. Some of them are fucking grindy.
You can see it looks like a window with an arrow and it says 5X. What that means is it rolls down all 5 windows at once. So the 4 windows in the doors plus the rear window, you push that and they all go down. You want to be like completely open air. You don't have to manually. You have this sort of quick down button that lets you enter an open air space very easily. Probably the most interesting new control in the R2 though, on the steering wheel, you It also pulls and pushes and even tilts left and right. And if you pull it towards you, then it allows you to adjust what you're seeing on the left part of the gauge cluster screen. You can change the media that's playing, your efficiency level, or your tire pressure monitor, which is pretty cool. So that's the left disc. Now, over on the right disc, one disc is up, down, and that adjusts what you're seeing in your central display. And you can change between the current autonomous vehicle stuff that's being used or a full-screen map. This disc has a next function too. It can also be used to adjust your climate control. Once this little menu is up with adjustability, you can move it over to the side, and then you can pull up your or your fan speed, which you can also adjust using the disc, and that is so climate controls on the steering wheel. I've been asking automakers to do this for years. No one has ever taken me up on it, but here we are. We have it again. Now, the discs on the steering wheel also have various other functions, but the most commonly used, besides what I just showed you, will be adjusting the mirrors. If you go into the central infotainment screen to sort of the vehicle settings, you can pull up your mirror adjustments, and you can use the discs to move the mirrors out, in, up, down. Pretty standard sort of mirror adjustment using those discs, which is pretty nice to see. Now, speaking of tech, before I get too far into the center screen, I want to point out one other really nice feature of the gauge cluster screen, which is a blind spot camera. So you put on your turn signal to change lanes, and the blind spot camera appears in your gauge cluster showing you what you would want. You've seen this already in Hyundai and Kia models, and Tesla has sort of a different version of it, but it's always nice to see this feature of really safety by showing you an image of what's there in an area you might not see. But moving on to the giant screen in the center, of course the focal point of the interior, I have to say this infotainment system is excellent. It's very responsive, incredibly intuitive, easy to figure out, high quality, large screen, it all works great, and it's wonderful stuff. Let me take you through a little bit of it. In the bottom left and right corners, you have your climate control. You can adjust your fan speed, turn on your heated seat, your window defroster, etc. And if you tap the center of these climate controls, it pulls up a full climate menu that allows for more flexibility. Over on the passenger side, you also have the addition of a volume control for the stereo, because obviously the driver can adjust the stereo bit access, so they can use this instead. Now beyond that, along the bottom of the screen, you can see a few different kind of menu options. In the very middle, you have this one, that's the navigation, which pulls up your navigation map. Again, 3D, very easy to see, figure out, move around, zoom, it all works really well. Next to that, the music one, of course, pulls up music and media. And then there's one that shows sort of an image of a car, the wheels, and that pulls up sort of the driving menu that lets you change your drive mode, your suspension feel, your brake regen. All of that stuff can be done in that menu. The final icon here is the camera, which of course pulls up the camera system. This camera system is fine, nothing particularly exciting or great, no like clever or crazy camera stuff you see in some cars, but it works well and does what it's supposed to. Now, the other important icon in this lower center part is an image of a vehicle. You press that, and it pulls up sort of instant vehicle control. Specifically, this control panel lets you open up the tailgate, open up the mirror, turn on interior lighting. But the thing I like best about this control panel is that if you tap the play button, it pulls up the music that you're listening to. It's the button because this overlay can go over basically any other screen. So if you have the navigation map up and you press the little color tab and go to music, then you can see both the map and the music in one screen. I already showed you can do that in the gauge cluster too. Wonderful configurability. Music and map on both screens, and you can make other adjustments depending on what you prioritize most. Pretty cool. Now, as for the icons over on the left side, it's like your basic vehicle functions. Also have your lock and unlock wheels, door and lock and unlock. At the very top, you have RU, which is the initial of your car. You name the car, and RU pulls up in this case, U, that's the name of the car, but if it were mine, it does D or DB up there. And when you tap on that, it pulls up some basic controls, big side mirrors like I showed you before. It also does the steering wheel, kind of typical controls.
Damn it!
Given the vehicle size, you don't expect a huge back seat. That's kind of compact to mid-sized territory, but this one really has big space back here. I am 6'4" adult. I have a lot of space for knees, for head, legs, hips, everything. It's a really surprisingly roomy back seat, and you don't have a central pump, as you can see. So even a middle passenger back here has good room for their feet, their legs. You really could seat 3 across back here if you had to. It's a pretty nice place to be. In fact, I'm legitimately impressed with Rimac packaging, because on the similar size cars that have a big back seat like this, they typically steal some of the front trunk space for the back seat. Like the RX-5, the whole interior kind of pushes out to make your space. But the Rimac package has a full-size front compartment like an engine. And so you don't have
Come on.
Aside from the sizing, I will say there's nothing particularly exciting or amazingly clever in back, like some of the stuff you see in front. You do have climate back here, as you can see, but no climate in more than that. You have heated rear seats, which is a nice feature, but you don't have any storage compartment with a door that goes out to the back of the front center console. You have USB-C ports you can see in the front seat backs. They're sort of next to this clip thing, which mounts up with an accessory that lets you stick a camera back there. So you can plug in devices. However, you don't have a output-style power port in the second row, which is a little disappointing. Like we're seeing that more and more. Now, it is worth pointing out that you have the center also back here, and you have two cup holders, which is nice to see. But the drawback is with the cup holders here, of course, you have to choose between in the row or having a second row. There are drink holders molded into the door panels, you can see, but these are more for water bottles and not for like paper cups you would get at that restaurant and bring your kids home to buy. What I really like about that seat here is that the center seat can pull down independently of the two rear seats on the side. And that means if the two kids are fighting on the side here, come back to the seat, you get one face to seat, or if you have some large, long item like a speaker or something into a cargo area, you don't have to pull down half of the back seat to do it. You just pull down the center and you're good because of the speaker. Speaking of storage, I also like that once again the door panel has a two-row storage system with a lower cargo and upper storage compartment, which is nice to see. It kind of adds to the rear practicality. And next up, we move on to the cargo area, which is shockingly practical in this car. You open it up, you can see there is a really large cargo area back here, which I say shockingly because, again, that second row, the rear seats have a lot of space. You'd think they would have robbed some of that space from the cargo area, but it doesn't feel like it.
Get all the juicy juice.
Space, and of course, because of the boxy design, you don't lose anything to a teardrop shape like in some cars, so you can fit some really tall, bulky items back here if you want. And there's extra cargo storage on the side. You can see the little size of cargo storage. And there's even more cargo storage under the floor. You lift this up, you can see almost a full-size trunk under here where you can put like more valuable items that you want to roll around the whole cargo area, or just want to keep them outside. That is a pretty practical thing back here. And I like the fact that over on the side you can see two power ports. One household style, which is nice to have, and one for the rest of the style or phone phone. That is really nice to see that household power port back here. Although I generally always prefer to also see them within the passenger compartment, it just adds a little bit more. And then there's the bed. This car, and this is all the stuff I like, is offered with an almost amazing array of really cool accessories. And one of them is a mattress that you can put back here. You fold down the second row, stick the mattress on top, and you can see this is a really good accessory that you can buy, and then you can sleep lying flat in the back of the car. You can say that this cargo area, which is controlled, can fit the height of a 96th percentile male. So most people will be able to round down to that here and really want to use the car for camping. But if you really want to go camping, how about the rooftop tent? That's another accessory. It's going to be offered for the R2 beginning next year, and it's cool. You can see full rooftop tent with a ladder to climb up to the top. You mount it on those crossbars, which again are compatible with the R1, as is the tent itself. Now, you can see the tent is very nice and light and open and airy, which makes it feel especially nice to be camping on the roof. And there's even more to the tent. You climb up here, and you'll notice there's climate vents integrated inside the
No
tent.
fucking way! Climate vents into the tent!
Up there. There's also a USB-C port, two of them actually, one on each side, along
cool.
with lights. You can press and turn on a light so that you can read while you're camping in here. And it's all powered through the car. There's a little cord that you connect from the tent to a different interesting Rivian accessory, and that would be a power adapter. You can see this will plug into the charge port and provide household outlets on the outside of the car. It powers the tent, but it can also power anything you want. In fact, Rivian told me it's capable of fully inflating a child's bouncy house. So if you wanted to do that for like a birthday party, you don't have to plug it into your house. You can plug it in at your car with this cool power adapter. Another cool accessory is this projection screen. As you can see, mounts to the tent or the vehicle itself. You can put up a screen, and when you're camping, you can watch a movie with a projection screen accessory in your Rivian. It's all pretty cool for adventure stuff. And finally, a few more important details that go beyond the cool features that are important to cover. Let's start with performance. This particular version of the R2 has about 655 horsepower and about 610 pounds. Those are serious numbers, and they send us to 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds. So it's obviously legitimately quick. And I mentioned earlier the starting price for the R2 is going to be around $45,000. I'm very strongly suspect that will not be for this model. My suspicion is this is the configuration of some launch edition they're they're going to do, which is kind of a top trim model. And over time, they will roll out more affordable, kind of less high-performance versions that meet that $35,000 base price figure. If you want the big power, the launch edition, you'll probably have to pay a lot more. But I don't think that the other detail is this is a unibody vehicle. The R1S is not on frame, which is how most like serious, capable off-road trucks are. Unibody is more like a crossover. Pretty significant change between the two vehicles, but even though they look relatively similar, their construction is completely different. It's totally different. That's also true of the suspension. The R1 model has a pretty strict air suspension that allows them to lift up crazy ground clearance numbers or lower for kind of maximum on-road performance. The R2 does not. It has typical coil springs that cannot bounce up or down. However, it still has pretty respectable ground clearance. Rivian says 9.7 inches of ground clearance in this vehicle. Compare that to a Model Y at about 6.6 inches, and you see this has significantly more clearance and more capability as a result. Now, in addition to losing the air suspension from the R1, the R2 also loses some other kind of more advanced R1 suspension components, but Rivian says it does still have active suspension dampers. They're always monitoring your inputs, and depending on the type of driving you're doing, they can kind of adjust their settings to fully support your drive. So if you're off-road, they can get softer. If you're going hard in the canyons, they can tighten up for a stiffer suspension and better handling. It's not quite what you get in the R1. In fact, it's not that close, but it does a decent job for the price point. And since we're talking about suspension and driving, let's do it. I'm going to go be one of the first people in the world outside of Rivian to get behind the wheel of the R2. All right, driving the R2. This is a big deal.
Nice work.
Time for this vehicle to come out since it was first revealed, and obviously the R1, very cool. I have been very supportive of R1. It was my car of the year, both as an SUV and as a truck in the respective years when they came out. I think it's awesome, but it's also pretty big and pretty expensive, and it's getting more expensive. And so the concept of R2, the little Rivian, finally here. First impression is there's a lot of stuff you would recognize from R1 and R2, and specifically something that's very much missing from this sort of mid-size electric vehicle SUV space is that this feels more adventurous and more kind of off-road. Sitting up here, you're looking out over a square road, everywhere you go, the Range Rover, you feel like you're in a taller seating position, you feel like you're high up, much like you feel in R1. It makes you have sort of a more adventurous kind of full-on experience. You also have great visibility all around. There's a lot of glass pads, sort of a boxy off-roader look that is so popular. From a driving perspective, though, I have to say I am surprised. I'm in sport mode here, and I am surprised just how athletic R2 is on sort of kind of a curvy canyon road. Definitely feels more athletic to me than R1 than the car, and you can tell that it feels more dynamic. Now, in that equipment, I think you lose a little bit of like the road R1, like you have in a Range Rover, where you're in a big full-size SUV, you kind of own the world. This definitely feels smaller, like you have a smaller vehicle. The benefit is more athletic. The drawback is maybe not quite as, solid and on top of everything like you get from something that's a little bit larger, a little bit wider, a little bit longer, just has more presence and takes up more space. Speed is amazing. This car is exceptionally quick. Obviously, this version is, an ultra-powerful version of R2. Presumably, there will be sort of less powerful...
No! Ads!
Level of performance, and I have to say, on this curvy road,
Why is
the
Guy
dynamics are
Fieri
surprisingly
in the
good. It's
neighbor's
less body roll
kitchen?
than you might think. It doesn't feel as lumbering as
It's slider Sunday! These chicken parm sliders on
really
King's
makes me feel
Hawaiian
athletic
rolls
and
are
feel
fire!
surprisingly concise,
Everything's
and
better
it really
between
does
King's Hawaiian bread.
remind you of a smaller, more agile car than R1. Now, with that said, I'm also pretty impressed by how relatively comfortable it is. This car does not have the air suspension and some of the other sort of suspension technology that makes the R1 so impressively comfortable. That's something that a lot of people talk about driving that car, is how it's surprisingly comfortable given all of the benefits that it offers. I don't feel that this car is dramatically worse than that. I don't feel that stuff is necessarily that noticeable. Part of it is your expectation is a little bit lesser in terms of ride quality. But even here in the firm suspension setting in sport mode, I actually feel that it's relatively rational. I really am kind of curious to see whether and how much this may eat into R1 sales. Obviously, there are people who are going to want the full size, the 3-row, etc. But this has a lot of the same benefits in a smaller and more affordable package. It's really quite an impressive vehicle. It really is a pretty good all-rounder, just like R1. You know, R1 is the most capable and the fastest, and it can seat people, and it's like really amazing that it can do all that. This really does kind of feel like that in a scaled-down package, which seems like a fairly easy thing to do, but is actually relatively hard to pull off, especially when you're getting rid of a row of seats. You're trying to hit a price point. It's even though it looks fairly similar, like a 7/8 version, there's a little bit more to it than that. All right, flooring here to get on the freeway. Oh, man.
Fieri in the neighbor's kitchen.
Crazy fast, which people kind of expect now from their electric cars. I will say, I drove the new quad motor R1, and that is so fast and it's so big that it almost feels like a little sketchy. This does not have that feel at all. It's not quite as fast, but you don't really need that level of performance. This certainly gives you more performance than you really need.
It's Slider Sunday! These chicken parm sliders on King's Hawaiian Rolls are fire! Everything better between King's Hawaiian Red.
Pretty normal, especially for sort of a taller, boxier vehicle. You always get a little bit more wind noise with a design like this, but it's manageable and reasonable. Surprisingly little tight. I think basically anybody who's going to be able to, who's still looking for an electric SUV, is going to want to have this on their radar. There's a lot of great things about this car that I think are really beneficial. Curious to see where all of the pricing falls, all of the trim levels, and all of the versions. And obviously, to hear full range numbers from EPA as we get closer to launch, that could be kind of make or break. But I think regardless, a capable kind of off-roading vehicle.
Attention folks, we've got hogs on the road. We're going to be late.
Having to commute is history. Search work from home jobs at monster.com.
Rivian R2. This is a really impressive vehicle. It takes everything we love about the R1S SUV and scales it down a little bit, a more manageable size and a more affordable price point. This really is a well-executed vehicle, really fantastic. And I think even as EV demand slows down a little bit, this will still be a big hit. And now it's time
You
to
have
give
all the
R2
ingredients for this in
a
your
Doug
fridge.
score.
But ask yourself,
And the Doug score is here, 70 out of 100, which puts the R2 here against rivals, better than every single one of them except Rivian's own R1S. And even then, I would rather have an R2.
of all the times you've made it at home, has it ever tasted like our McMuffin?
The R2 is an exceptional vehicle, quite possibly the best all-around electric vehicle I've ever driven in terms of overall ability to do it all. Everything. Its awesome all-around status even carries over to its pricing, which is totally reasonable. Rivian hasn't announced it yet, but I've seen the numbers.
Sorry.
This is a 2002 Lexus RX 300, and it's a
Having to commute
hugely
is
important
history.
vehicle
Search
in
work from home jobs at monster.com.
Before this showed up, luxury SUVs were kind of a niche product. People didn't know if they were going to catch on. Then the RX came with massive sales, massive success, and everyone rushing to catch up. This is one of the very first luxury SUVs as we know it today. And today I'm going to review this car and show you all of its perks and features. Before I get started, big news, this RX 300 is currently for sale, and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This RX is auctioned live from California its whole life, and you can get it on Cars and Bids. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link below to visit the live auction for this RX, where you can bid and buy only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the first and features the original RX 300. Either super expensive and like Lexus's own LX450, which had come out a few years before, or they were buying on things like the Range Rover Discovery, or they were just slightly nicer versions of mainstream cars like the Infiniti or the Oldsmobile Woodbine. All of that stuff had been tried until 1998, when Mercedes came out with the M-Class. That was, to me, the first true luxury SUV that was aimed at one of the middle-of-the-road suburban kind of upscale rider. They didn't want to go off-road. They didn't want to play crazy money. They wanted something nicer than a Pathfinder. That was the M-Class, and it was a massive success. But while Mercedes kind of blazed the trail, Lexus refined the formula the following year. The ML came out in 98, but the RX came out in 99, and Lexus took a more conventional approach to what we know as the luxury SUV today. That's because the ML was still body on frame like a truck with a low-range gear for off-roading. They were so new to the luxury SUV thing, they thought people might actually want that stuff. The RX instead used a car-based unibody chassis, and it gave up on low range and any pretension of off-roading or capability at all. This was just for suburban driving on the pavement, taking your kids to school, going to church, to work, whatever. That's what this was all about. And that obviously resonated more with buyers, and that is how we know of the midsize luxury SUVs. Yes, that's how they all are now. So, let's get a little detail on this. Lexus first previewed what it was thinking for the original RX 300, the something called the Lexus SLV concept. They showed at the Chicago Auto Show in February of 97 for the very first time. And if you go back and look at this, it's actually tremendously close to what became the original RX 300 production car, which was based heavily on the Lexus ES, which was their popular midsize luxury sedan. And that's why the whole thing SUVs were based on truck bodies. The Ford Explorer was a Ranger. The Lexus LX was a body on frame. Everything was a truck. Essentially, the crossover as we know it. It wasn't a concept that they even used the Lexus ES RX. Got a 3-liter V6 with about 220 horsepower and 222 pound-feet of torque. From the ES, so this was just sort of a raised-up ES. That's what you could think of it as. You have to trouble understanding this vehicle. It's an outsider conversation. What is this crazy new thing? But of course, they bought it. And they didn't just buy the original RX. They bought this thing in massive numbers. Right away, it became the best-selling Lexus product, and it has been ever since. It's been on 99 for 27 years now. Like just last year in 25, Lexus sold 113,000 RX SUVs. That only did 77,000 sales. Considerably more than number 2. In fact, the RX accounts for around 37% of all Lexus sales even today. That's how important this vehicle and this segment is to Lexus and the luxury car world in general. As for quirks and features on the outside, there aren't many, and that's exactly how Lexus wanted it. Just creating this vehicle was both risky and groundbreaking, and so they didn't want to take too many risks with the design because, well, the mere existence was a risk. With that said, there are the tail light. The original RX models all got the Tesla tail light, sort of a tail light lens with the actual color part inside, which Lexus had previously invented the material on the Tesla, and this has become a really car world, but especially in the tuner scene. People are putting out Tesla tail lights on every single car. It's weird to see how that's actually Lexus RX. It's such a non-car, modern also worth pointing out is kind of an odd thing. You have this stuck-on plastic oval, which you'd think would be a weird but you actually don't notice it. Something else you don't notice, but an interesting little Easter egg detail for this car. You can see the little valve on the front fender is model year. Once the RX got this feature, all RX the upper part is this nice coral white that almost looks like it's yellow and it's really beautiful color. But we found this pretty common on Lexus models back in the day. Those were all Lexus models. It's thought to be sort of a more luxurious, upscale, dynamic, single. That was stuff like Toyota, the Lexus is and all that eventually changed. But in this era, it's how they did it. I will say, the overall design design of this car I've always liked. I think actually it's a pretty nice looking car. A lot of people think this is boring, you know, Lexus RX, not interesting, but I think if you kind of remove yourself from that image of the car and just look at the style, the design as a whole, it really is an attractive car. And interestingly enough, there was a Toyota version. Although this was only sold here in North America as a Lexus, they didn't want to potentially cheapen this car by offering a Toyota companion. There was a Toyota overseas. In Asia, the Toyota Harrier is what it was called, spelled like the Harrier fighter jet plane thing, and that was the Toyota version of the car. Now, it's worth noting that there was eventually a Toyota model heavily based on the RX because, of course, the Highlander was always kind of longer, more family-focused. They were the same chassis, the same powertrain. They were very distinct vehicles. That was the one you got if you needed 3 rows, turning the kids around. This is the one you got if you wanted full coverage. And in this first generation, it really was an attractive but cheap. I definitely find it funny, by the way, because later RX models really started taking design risks, especially the current one, which is pretty out there. Look, the big grille, the sort of sweeping window line, it's all pretty crazy. But back in the day, they played it safe. A pretty big change to the Lexus. It was really nice, but at the exterior, they didn't take any crazy daring risks in here either. Instead, it gave you a lot of what you already expected of just nicer. For example, you have this also mounted on the shift knob, giving you some of the more upscale experience. You can find it also on the door panel, right here around the power window switchers, and even on the steering wheel. It's wood and wrapped stuff, which took you more upscale than Toyota. Another big Lexus luxury touch is you had a screen in the middle of the dashboard. That was a big deal back in the day, even though the screen really doesn't have many functions. It's the temperature outside, it's the climate control display, it's the stereo presets. You don't even touch the screen, you select them with buttons along the bottom, but just having a screen distinguished you from Toyota and from other mainstream cars and really gave you a luxury feel in this interior. Having a screen was cool. But of course, you also had leather upholstery, and you can see the seats, not just sort of generic leather, but a little bit of ruffling and even some kind of design work with this trim down the center and exposed stitching, which looked kind of nice. You also had other upscale touches, like chromed door handles, where they would have been plastic on a Toyota. And the gauge cluster was this sort of high-quality affair, dark but backlit in this nice glow. Instead of just using ambient light to light it up, it was always lit, and it looked luxurious and nice. Also, the front seats had armrests, which wasn't a big deal, but again, distinguished it a little from Toyota and other mainstream cars. All these details added up to make for a pretty nice interior, but it still felt familiar, especially if you had a Toyota. Things in here were durable. They were intelligently placed, intuitive. It made ergonomic sense. It was obvious where everything was, and everything felt good. It just like ratcheted up a little in terms of luxury and quality. I think, of course, there are a few interesting quirks. One of my very favorites is that there is a large but noticeable gap between the center control stack and the central storage console. You can see a big open spot here, and that was undoubtedly unquestionably for women to put their purses when they drove this car. A wide swath of many RX drivers and RX drivers even today were women. So that was an odd thing that women would want to see in the car. They really knew who their target market for this vehicle was going to be. Now, if you didn't read that spot, the center console had a little drawer that would open up where you could leave it open and use it as like a storage shelf, or you could put stuff in it and close it if you wanted to hide anything. This center console also included kind of rudimentary cup holders. You would pop open the panel and they sort of folded out so you could put drinks in. And
Damn, I wasn't even paying attention.
Also a nice feature to have in here, in the glove box, we have a 6-disc CD changer, which doesn't seem convenient, although a lot of cars in this era have these 6 CD changers in the trunk or the cargo area. Putting the glove box is a nice touch. Of course, the models got it in dash. You just put the CD in while you're doing the spotlight down, added to the luxury of the car, but it wasn't really good. A couple of other interesting things I like. The left of the steering wheel, this is the front area. There's this little piece under the dashboard. It pops out for a storage compartment. Storage compartment if you want to keep like coins or holes or anything you wanted to hide from other people's car. I also always loved the little pop-up speakers on the top of that. You see these tiny little things poking out and pointing at you to give you a slightly better sound experience from your Lexus sound system. Just added a little bit of quality and class. Of course, now in cars, the speakers will actually rise up automatically from the dashboard, which looks even cooler, but back in the day, this is what you had instead. Now, as for the back seat, well, it checks
Brettley, Molinar, Bacalar. All right,
Backs
we're
in
going to
the
let that
Lexus RX
refill.
300.
We can
Specifically,
play the
it
other
was
one.
pretty big. You had enough space back here for adults, which
Listen.
was important. People carrying around kids or adults in this car, they wanted the practicality of a mid-sized sedan that they wanted in the time. They didn't want to give up anything, and this back seat didn't make it. It was decent size back here. You also had climate vents to add a little comfort for rear seat passengers, and even a little power port all the way down the bottom.
1 sec before we start.
Outlet. We didn't have USBs or household outlets in the cars just yet, but there was something where passengers could charge their devices. Of course, back in this era, they didn't have any devices, but it was there nonetheless. You also had back here leather upholstery, just like in front, the same ruffled leather, the same exposed stitching, and on the door panel, the same light wood, looked nice, and the same chromed door handles. Everything back here was just as nice as it was up front, even though it doesn't have any like modern cool screens or tablets or whatever. All that came later. This was a simpler time, but still nice and luxurious. And then there was the cargo area. Back in the days before power tailgates, you had a latch back here, you lifted it up, and you can see this cargo area, the shape of it's actually pretty interesting. It was exceptionally wide, wider than cargo areas in modern cars, but it's not all that deep. It's not like that long for bigger items. And the reason is, this is not a large car. This original Lexus RX 300 is only 180 inches long, which means that it's actually shorter in length than the modern Lexus NX, which is their entry-level compact.
Bailey Blade, I think we still need to.
The modern-day Lexus RX is now more than a foot longer than this original RX. So the lineup has grown so much that they've actually had space to slot a smaller car under it, and even a smaller one than that, the Lexus UX. Clearly, this was a lot smaller and mid-size, meant something a lot different back in the late 90s than it does today. A couple of interesting things in this cargo area. For one, you open up this panel and you can see a power port. Kind of surprised, not a lot of cars in this era had that. Again, no household, no USB, that stuff wasn't around, but power in the cargo area is pretty tough. You also had a first aid kit back here, and you can see it's mounted on the side of the cargo area. Actually, it's on the side of the cargo area. You stick it on there, and then you just add it in place when you need it. I tried to take it off. It's very difficult. I don't want to mess it up. I just set it in this first aid kit since the dealer first set it on back in the day that they were prepping this car to be sold. One other interesting item, you can open up this cargo area for spare tire area, tools, not even extra storage under there really, but in case you needed to swap. But other than that, cargo area pretty normal.
Fuck!
Before I get behind the wheel, I want to talk about 98, you had the Mercedes Camo.
Shit, is that...
99, the Lexus RX 300. In 2000, the BMW X5 came out, and after that, it was off to the races. Within a decade, basically every luxury brand had at least one luxury SUV, and in some cases, many more than that. The X3 and the Acura RDX and the WX, and all of these cars started popping up. The segment was wonderful. Really big start. The X98 and the RX 99, creating the M5 and then refining in the RX the formula that we know today that has become so popular is the mid-size luxury SUV. So many on the road, and this is one of the cars that started it all. And with that in mind, I am excited to get behind the wheel and kind of take myself back for and that I was an early adopter of a luxury SUV 25 years ago.
No wonder it was so loud and annoying.
RX 300. All right, driving the original RX 300. I remember when this car came out as a kid. I was 11, 12, and I remember how desirable this car was. And getting inside, I'm flooded with memories returning about exactly why it was so desirable. I remember looking at these as a kid and just being like in awe of anybody who drove one. They were so cool. And they were sort of like 2 rungs up from what my parents could afford. We got a brand new car in 98, and it was a base model Camry with hubcaps and cloth seats and a cassette player and a 4-cylinder. Like, it was base. But I remember, like, if you had that car, you dreamed of like a Fiat or an RX would be fixed and running the Lexus brand. And I remember being so in awe. The things that made this car so desirable then were real and are real. It looks nice and it looks clean. Even though they sold it to me, it looked like a Lexus. It looked like a and then the other half, it was just nice. But the RXs are everywhere. They're still such a good job with this experience. They make it, excessive and weird, but they gave you style and like the wood and the leather, with a classy interior. And it really stepped it up from Toyota in a way that if you were into Toyotas and their dependability, it's like, oh, I can have all that and have one. And it was really touching the long story.
Okay.
This car, 125 years. I mean, this car is exactly what you want from, it certainly was not an excitement machine, but that wasn't its purpose at all. It was supposed to be like powerful, work, effortless, was kind of the goal of smooth, calm, and comfortable, and that's exactly what it is. And this 300 V6 was used in a lot of Toyotas and Lexus models. At the time, it was always a good car. It was very nice, decent, powerful enough for this size. And just the way it drives, the way it steers, the way the suspension feels, like this is a calm, comfortable, nice car. And of course, these have turned out to be tremendously reliable and dependable, and they have long. I mean, these have, you go on Craigslist, you see these at 300, Facebook Marketplace, 350,000 miles with no problem as long as people do basic maintenance. Now, to be clear, this is not really an enthusiast car. I review cars like this that are sort of seminally important, like the second-gen Prius, and things like that, that are not necessarily enthusiasty, but were important to the car world. And there's no doubt that this was important to the car world, but it's not, like, exciting. But that was kind of Lexus's pitch. It was like, we make this good car. It is not fun.
Good.
It's dependable and luxurious, and it's an SUV.
Bailey.
To the suburbs. Like, this isn't an SUV that you need, you know, to put on your big boy pants and go off-roading. Like, this is just one you can drive around. And boy, was it a hit. I'm also just struck by
I could just make 10 by
a lot of cars in our office
not racing.
In a lot
Let's
of
do
used
that.
cars, you know, and they're almost all enthusiast used cars, but like, you know, everything from Mitsubishi Evos to old Jags and Hondas and Ferraris, and the Lexuses always just hold up so nicely. Now, we cherry-pick the best examples to do videos on, but that's also true of all the other cars. And it's just amazing to me how nicely these Lexuses hold up.
Bailey.
The buttons on the stereo are not, you know, falling off or damaged or even worn after 127,000 miles in 22 years. The transmission still feels good. The suspension still feels good. The
What's the
interior
exclamation
still
point
it's worn
for?
nicely. You still get the sense that, like, there's a lot of life left. This stuff isn't going to start to deteriorate tomorrow. You get the sense you're going to still see these on the road in another 25 years, which is just a testament to how well built this car is. Even though it may not be the most exciting or the most fun, but it just does the job, middle of the road, for a wide bell curve of luxury SUV buyers. And honestly, it makes sense because Lexus basically invented that. They did it great from day one in this car, and they still do it great today. And so that's the original Lexus RX 300. This is among the very first luxury SUVs to really catch on, and it helped to change the automotive world forever. This is a nice one. There aren't many nice ones left, but you can get this one on Cars and Biz. And now it's time to give the original RX a Dove score. And the Dove score is here, 40 out of 100, which puts the RX 300 here against rivals. The daily score is strong. Held back by the weekend score, which is a big low. That was sort of the point of the RX 300 though. It wasn't really somebody had just a tremendously confident, dependable, vehicle that carried ran around the suburbs with more style and luxury than typical family SUVs. And that was one of those things. The RX 300's major legacy was on the
Should have went over there.
is a 1998 Cadillac Catera, and it was supposed to be a revolution. Cadillac realized that they needed something to appeal to young, hip, fresh, new people. That was supposed to be this, the Catera.
I remember a guy that had a Catera.
And then it wasn't. Really, it failed. And today I'm going to review this car, explain it all.
I thought it was cool. It had this LED bar on the back. Let's see if Doug points it out. Oh, I can get it? Cars and Bids.
Has just one owner in California for its whole life, and it's a great example of the Cadillac Catera, and it can be yours on Cars and Bids. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Cadillac Catera, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Catera, and there are many, starting with the existence of this car itself. There's a lot to talk about with this one, so strap in. Now, back in the 90s, Cadillac's brand was all about old.
Is it like a Saturn?
These days, Cadillac is still kind of an elderly person brand, but back in the 90s, truly, that's all they had. Their only vehicles were the Fleetwood, a massive sedan only bought by old people. The DeVille, a massive sedan only bought by old people. The Eldorado, a massive coupe only bought by old people. And the Seville, a slightly less massive sedan, but was still only bought by old people. In the 90s, the average age of a classifier was 130 as exactly that. It was the largest Opel sedan in Europe, and it became the smallest Cadillac sedan here in the United States. Now, of course, they didn't just bring over the old again. In addition to Cadillac-ifying the exterior, they also did it over the Cadillac's brand image, and they made a massive marketing push to demonstrate their appeal to younger buyers. The Catera was named the Caddy that Zigs. Everybody who was alive during this time period interested in cars remembers the ads. It included a duck named Ziggy. The Cadillac logo has ducks in it, but they're very serene, old-school ducks sitting on a pond, perhaps. Ziggy was a bright red duck who was cooler and more fun, and you were supposed to associate Ziggy with the Catera. The marketing push included Cindy Crawford in advertisements for this car. It was all about bringing a whole new buyer into the Cadillac world. So, what did General Motors give us? Under the hood of every Catera was a 3.4-liter V6 with 200 horsepower. Reasonably potent for the time, but it was always made into a 4-speed automatic transmission. No manual was offered. Now, every Catera was rear-wheel drive, just like the Opel Omega, and they were all made in Germany. They seemed like a sports sedan. With a starting price of around $30,000, the closest competitors were the Lexus ES and GS, the Infiniti i30, the new Audi A3 at the time, the Mercedes C-Class, and directly in its sights, the BMW 3 Series. Their drawback was, although this was a smaller Cadillac, it was still pretty big for a sports sedan, almost 2 feet longer than a 3 Series, and with only a 4-speed auto and only 200 horsepower. Well, the Caddy that zigs may have been a bit of a but one thing was certain about the Caddy that zigs was incredibly quirky and amusing. Particularly to anybody familiar with other General Motors and Cadillac vehicles at the time, since this was never developed as a Cadillac or even by General Motors North America using regular GM switchgear. Everything was totally different, totally unfamiliar, and in some cases, totally weird. We start with the key fob, which looks like a regular GM key fob as lock, unlock, and pump, and also the part which you open up the fuel door, which actually is a pretty good idea for a key fob. I don't know that I've ever seen it before, but this car has it pretty cool. Next, you open the door, you climb inside, and yes, everything in this car is different. Let's start with the window switches, which are not located on the driver's side door panel like in every other GM car at the time. Instead, they're in the middle, in the center console, around the gear selector. These odd switches are the power window switches. They're unlabeled, and they have a little light at the bottom, so you always know exactly where they are. Of course, driver is up and to the left. They're all in the relative position of each window. And since we're in this vicinity, let's talk about the shifter itself, which is rather odd. Instead
The
of a button on
fridge,
side
man.
to push
Did
to
I
go
not
into
do
gear,
it?
there was a little switch kind of underneath that you would lift up, and then you would shift into gear. And on
I'm
the
done
top
with
of the shifter, there was a button marked S, which meant sport mode, which certainly would have been a little
Go to the
unfamiliar
shop.
to Cadillac buyers in the 1990s. You press the S, and a little S with a gear icon shows up on your gauge cluster, which was probably confusing to people back then. Speaking of confusing, another interesting item in here, there's no cup holders. You want them? Too bad. This car was built in Germany. The Europeans, they didn't
No
use
import.
cup
Okay.
holders, but they did use cigarettes. And so you have where cup holders would normally be at the base of the center console, you have a giant ashtray and cigarette lighter. Because Europeans have always made fun of Americans for drinking coffee or soda while we drive, but they got no problems with smoking, and so this car prioritized that over cup holders. Also unusual, the turn signal and wiper stalks you can see here look nothing like any other General Motors car. These sort of horizontal,
Very
kind of
interesting.
flat-shaped stalks that are definitely a little bit unusual. And probably the most unusual part is the cruise control function, which operates on the turn signal stalk with these tiny little buttons.
What we
that
got
will
on
focus
the
precision
daily
to get
events.
exactly right, or
Oh,
else
we got our
you'll end up turning
Hurricane
on the brights or even the turn
Trofeo
signal when you're
EO.
trying to activate your cruise control. I'm sure that would have been frustrating to any
Where's
old
my
school Cadillac
plane?
buyer at the time. Also, an unusual
Should have
thing about
finished
these
that.
stalks,
was dumb.
if you flash the high beams, you can see I'm pulling the flash, then the high beams turn off, even though I haven't yet released the stock. I'm still holding it where the high beam flashes.
That was like
but
1,000.
The high beams have turned
Oops.
off. The car doesn't allow you to just hold the stock and keep the high beams on. That's for flashing only, and it turns off for you if you don't do it yourself. Anyway, next up, to the left of the steering wheel in that signal stalk, you see a dial that's marked Twilight, and there's an on-off button there. If you turn on Twilight, this will allow the car to keep its headlights on for a certain number of seconds after you turn it off so that you can safely get into your house with some lighting. And this little dial under the word Twilight allows you to adjust exactly how long the headlights stay on for once you turn off the car. Another interesting item in here is the rather large gauge cluster. Instead of being just directly in front of the steering wheel, it kind of moves all the way into the center of the dashboard. And actually, there's some cool design around it, because a gauge cluster that large would be bisected by the rim of the steering wheel, and indeed this one is, but they've engineered a perfectly sized space in the gauge cluster so that the steering wheel doesn't conflict with the look of the gauge cluster. That is a pretty neat idea. But the drawback of having such an unusually massive gauge cluster is that it pushes the climate vents out as well. So the result is 3 of the 4 climate vents in this interior are basically for the front passenger seat, since even the center climate vents are moved over by the large gauge cluster. The driver only really
how close did we get here?
To the left for driver's use. Now, one thing worth noting about this gauge cluster, something I absolutely love, is
epic
the
wild
warning
cards.
lights for
Okay.
oil pressure, battery voltage, and coolant or temperature are actually just the little icons for each of those gauges that light up when it's time to warn people. That's a cool way to integrate a warning light into a gauge cluster, although you may fail to appreciate it when you look down, you see your coolant temperature rising, and your coolant warning light has turned on. And next up, another interesting quirk in this car, in the center control stack area, you can see this button turns off traction control. Strangely enough, that is the largest button in the center console area. That's larger than the button to open the trunk, turn on the heated seat, turn on the radio to adjust the climate temperature or the fan speed. The largest button in the center control stack is traction control off, which of course is a button that nobody who bought this car would ever use. Another interesting quirk over on the driver door panel, you can see this little coin storage holder kind of stuck in place as an afterthought. It clearly doesn't fit in that spot, but they tacked it in there and made it perfectly sized for American coins, because of course the Opel Omega wouldn't have had slots for a dime, a quarter, and a nickel. But here in this car, they wanted to add it in, and so they tacked it in later. Now, next up, we move on to the back of the Catera.
XJR15, where am I?
One thing I really liked about this car, which was very plush leather seating surfaces. Take a look back here. The seats have been sat on, and they just look so leathery and comfortable and creamy, and they do feel very nice to sit in. It's the same deal up front, but those seats have a little more wear. These are just totally plush and basically look brand new. Adding in this upholstery was one of the upgrades they did to the Catera from its secretly Opel Omega status, which wouldn't have been as nice in this trend. Now, as you can imagine, based on what we saw up front, there is some more rather unusual stuff going on back here. Like, for example, when you look down at the seat base, you can see there are 4 seatbelt buckles, even though there's 3 of the rear seats. The reason for that is the middle seat has the buckle. What? From the rear shelf, and you would plug it into the first buckle, and then you would go across the chest and plug it into the second buckle, and so the middle passenger had to buckle up twice in order to activate their 3-point seatbelt, which was certainly odd. Also unusual, in the door panel, you can see this little panel cutout here. Open it up, and you have a in fact, you have individual ashtrays for rear seat passengers, and you have a cigarette lighter back here that goes on the back of the passenger console. Now, again, there are no cup holders back here. There are no cup holders in this entire car, but in fact, you have a second cigarette lighter and 2 more ashtrays because, well, this car came from Germany, and that's just what they did. Now, with that said, one nice benefit back here, going back to that center console, you have climate vents, and you have individual heated rear seats, little buttons you have on heated rear seats. Both of those things would have been a huge deal back in the mid-1990s, especially in this segment of the market. Not many vehicles like this had rear climate vents, and especially rear heated seats, which didn't really catch on for many years later. So, this car had some excellent. But undoubtedly, the weirdest and quirkiest thing going on in the back seats is the fact that the headrests are not actually mounted on the seats. If you look closely, you can see the headrest is mounted on the wheel itself, not on the seat itself. The seat is designed to be able to fold down and give you a pass-through from the trunk into the passenger part of the larger item. And the weird thing about this car is you can fold down the seat without actually removing the headrest if that's what you want to do. I'm not sure why they bothered to engineer that headrest from that big of a deal, but they did, and the headrest is wholly separate from the rear seats in the back of the black Catera. But anyway, next we move on to the trunk in the Catera. I open it up on the key fob with my handy trunk opener button, and then there's a little lifter back here. You lift up the rather heavy trunk lid, and you get into the trunk, which is fairly large, but otherwise mostly unremarkable, except for the interesting fact that it has this little latch built into the inside of the trunk lid. That latch is to emergency open the trunk from the inside in case someone kidnaps you in their Cadillac Catera. Catera. Now, these days, a latch like this is mandated on all new cars with a trunk by the U.S. government, but back in the day, it wasn't, and General Motors just stuck this here, I guess because they thought Catera drivers would be the kind of people who kidnap. Now, the drawback on this particular latch is that it isn't lighted. By law, the latches are all lighted now, but back in the day, they just stuck it there. If you had gotten kidnapped in this car, you never would have been able to see to pull that latch in order to escape. But it was there in case you got kidnapped and you really knew the Catera inside and out. And finally, we move outside the Catera, the gussied-up luxury Opel Omega, to discuss some quirks and features out here, starting with an interesting one with the headlights. When you have the headlights on and you put on the turn signal, a little light lights up kind of on the side of the car.
Why does that show me
the path where you be going, and then it turns off again when you turn off the turn signal.
perform no barrel rolls in a single car hunt event race?
Now, another interesting lighting element up front. When you
Were
put
those
on the
car
turn signal,
hunts?
the main bulb would switch off
I'll
blinking
do
with another
that.
turn signal bulb that was located in the
Yeah,
reflector
all right.
on the side of the car. And you can see one blinks, it turns off, then the other one blinks, and they just switch off back and forth. Now, that's not all that uncommon, but one weird thing about the Catera is it didn't
No
say
barrel
anything
rolls.
back. You put on the turn signal, and the rear main turn signal light switches off with a turn signal light in the side.
No
reflector back.
barrel
So a lot of
rolls,
cars that do this in
Jeff.
front, but I don't
None.
think I've ever seen
None
one that
allowed.
goes back. It is certainly a bit of an interesting Cadillac Catera specific item. Now, speaking of lighting, and worth pointing out in back, you have this large light bar that goes across the entire trunk of the car, giving it sort of a classy upscale look. You will notice back here you do not see the typical Cadillac reef and crest emblem. Instead, they've spelled out Cadillac across the back. They wanted to ditch the old school and embrace the new ways of young Cadillac. So, you might be wondering, what happened with the Catera? Based on the title of this video, you're probably guessing it didn't really need Cadillac sales target. But that's not entirely true. This car was relatively successful. It didn't require much engineering since they were already building it, and they managed to sell almost 100,000 of these in North America. The problem wasn't the sales numbers, it was who they were selling to. Guess what? It didn't reach the young people. It was the same old folks who were buying other Cadillac cars, just saw a smaller one at the dealership and decided to buy that instead. They didn't really hit that young, hip, fresh-faced buyer coming out of BMW. But the Catera did pave the way for the beginning of Cadillac. This car's last year was 2001. And in 2003, Cadillac replaced it with the CTS, which occupied the same market segment, but with more aggressive styling, sportier driving, more power, and it finally did start to resonate with those younger buyers, in concert with the Escalade that was also gaining popularity at the time. Those cars really did have an effect of making Cadillac kind of move away from the very, very old segment of the population they were catering to before. And these days, although the Cadillac buyer is still relatively old, they're not the elderly folks that they were back in the mid-90s. And one could argue that really the this car, even though this car itself wasn't a huge success. You might be curious, how does it drive? Well, let's find the wheel of Cadillac's early effort at appealing to the user. Let's find out. All right, driving the Cadillac Catera, the Caddy Zig. This is a very interesting experience for me. I was, 10 years old when this car was announced, and it's hard to really explain to modern people how much of an old person brand Cadillac really was. It's funny because today Cadillac still has kind of an image of an old person brand. The Escalade has obviously changed things a lot. But in the 90s, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, old people buy Cadillacs. That was all. That was it. Literally, it was an 80-plus crowd buying these cars exclusively. And when you have a brand, that's not great for continued development and growth of the brand, right? These people are going to die off, and then you're not going to have anybody left. And so, this car was a
You have all the
huge deal.
ingredients for
Cadillac
this in
now
your
is a car,
fridge.
kind of a younger
But
car.
ask
Maybe,
yourself
it doesn't get as much
this.
coverage, but this car was a
Of all the
huge deal
times
at
you've
the
made
time.
it at home,
Cadillac kind of
has
tried
it
something new
ever
and trying to go
tasted
into a
like
different segment,
our
but it hadn't really
McMuffin?
been in since the Cimarron in the 80s, which was an abject disaster. So, the first thing when you get inside this car, like I mentioned in the quirks and features portion, this is a totally different experience than any other Cadillac. Nothing in here feels familiar to other General Motors cars from this era. Obviously, that's because it was developed in Europe for European buyers. It was not co-developed with any sort of North American Cadillac, and so it's just totally foreign, literally and figuratively. It just feels very foreign in here. Now, just a few minutes behind the wheel of this, I can tell already why it's very clear why this car was not really a big hit with the younger buyers that Cadillac was looking for. Yes, this was a different car for Cadillac. It was sort of a rear-wheel drive, smaller car, which the Seville was supposed to be when it came out in '93, but it was still too big, and it was front-wheel drive, and it was just deeply old people car. This was going even smaller, going rear-wheel drive, going sporty, but it doesn't really succeed at doing any of that. It's not a particularly sporty car. It's not a particularly fast car, and it still feels sort of like a staid, stoic kind of, I don't want to say old person car because it wasn't really, like it did kind of reach a new segment, but it didn't really reach that many people in the new segment because it really wasn't like a BMW 3 Series alternative. For Cadillac, it was a very sporty car, Cadillac at the time. But for the buyer base as a whole, for automobilia, we looked at this car and we thought, 200 horsepower, automatic only.
You have all the ingredients for this in your fridge. But ask yourself this. Of all the times you've made it at home, has it ever tasted like our McMuffin?
But they really wanted to tighten things up. And this was Cadillac attempting to do that, but it just really didn't. Now, again, I got to put this in context because it's really important to explain. This car is way sportier than Cadillac models were at the time. It is sportier on a degree that is hard to even fathom or explain compared to Cadillac models at the time. Again, an improvement for Cadillac, but you know, if Cadillac is here in the world of sporty and BMW is here, this car brought Cadillac to here, but you weren't going to get those young buyers who were buying BMWs with a car like this. I will say, driving this car is a nice experience. Like, it feels nice in here. It feels luxurious. This particular one is in shockingly good condition. Very little wear in this interior. It's reasonably quiet in here. It's generally a nice place to be, honestly. But unfortunately, that was kind of part of the problem. It was a little bit more Cadillac luxury than it was, you know, sports sedan young people. And it is worth pointing out, this V6, this is a smooth engine. You know, it does what you want it to do, but it's not really eager or excited to get up and go, and the transmission doesn't help. The transmission is comfortable. It shifts very smoothly. Even, you know, still this car is 20 years old, it shifts very nicely, but you don't get the high performance anything when you're driving this car. Driving it now, it's hard to believe they pitched this as the Caddy Zig. Zig on that one. It does okay. And it certainly does better than other Cadillac models at the time. And it's very interesting to see this European car run this the Caddy that zigs, the rebirth of a new Cadillac that never birthed.
Having to commute is history. Search work from home jobs at monster.com.
Old people problem in the 1990s, and now it's time to give the Catera a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 40 out of 100, which puts the Catera here against some sort of similar cars. At the bottom, but most of these cars aren't quite drivable. This don't taste all right. Don't really test many cars like this. The Catera is so cool, but here's the thing, reminder of the kind of Cadillac decided to start even the younger generation of a very long career. That's still on.
Why is Guy Fieri in the neighbor's kitchen?
It's Slider Sunday! These chicken parm sliders on King's Hawaiian Rolls are fire! Everything's better between King's Hawaiian bread.
Safety first.
You have all the ingredients for this in your fridge. But ask yourself this. Of all the times you've made it at home, has it ever tasted like our McMuffin?
Anyone knows what kind of snake this is? He's big. You gotta get out of the trail, buddy. Okay, go. I don't know what to do with him. This is why we bring the professionals. There we go. Adios, dude. All right, back to driving.
Up until today, the best-selling car in the world was the Tesla Model Y, followed closely by the Toyota RAV4. It's just a compact SUV style of vehicle that people want. Today, Rivian is throwing their hat into the ring with the new Rivian R2, which has the footprint of the Model Y, but the ability to take adventures off the beaten path.
No barrel rolls.
Rivian's R2 has
Jeff.
more horsepower than a Ford F-150
No
Super
barrel
Duty,
rolls.
faster acceleration than a V8 Ford Mustang,
None.
while keeping the ground clearance of a top Jeep Wrangler.
Those are never quite as smooth as they are on camera. It's hard to watch. The thing I really like about electric vehicles is how quiet it is. It's so cool. It's like seriously like a Tesla and a Jeep had the quietness of an electric vehicle with the off-roadiness of a Jeep. Those are the technical terms.
To compete with
No
the
barrel
best-selling
rolls,
Jeep
Jeff.
and cut about 50% off the bill of materials, Rivian has swapped the suspension from active airbags that we see on the R1s to passive springs, passive roll bars, and semi-active dampers. The structural battery pack is made up of 750 battery cells. These become the floor of the R2, and all of these services are fitted with a three-phase module on top of the battery, right underneath the wheel, to your long-term serviceability. Not many people talk about Rivian's 20,000 mile drive from the battery.
we'll get to the front in a second, but I really like that they're focused on the front because this thing is, meant to be adventurous and explore the outdoors. We have the same pull handles that we have on the other Rivian vehicles, and our first Easter egg.
No barrel roll.
But no, Rivian has actually made a maze on the inside of the charging port door. The start point is here, and you work your way all the way down to the end point here. And they got to the point of adding Easter eggs to the vehicle. The rest of the details are equally as well thought out. Let's check out the other.
No barrel roll.
It's a power open or manually closed. Right here on the Rivian logo, there are 3 lines. Press that. The whole hood opens up. Inside of here, there's enough storage space for some golf gloves or like carry-on luggage. But the Easter egg is in here. The windshield wiper fluid kit. And it's actually a frog and a skunk. Which, since it's a frog and a skunk, frog, skunk, frunk, anyway.
Frog, okay.
The latch and then
Frog
pull it
and
in by
skunk.
itself. And the other Easter egg is inside the cap. We still have the flashlight in the door handle, which is just, a staple of Rivian's designs. Also, I did not know this, but Rivian makes a hand warmer / power bank that fits inside of the same sleeve. So you can always have a power bank with you. Also, you can warm your hands in the winter. And it's very easy to swap out between the two of them. One thing I like about the R2 is that even though
Okay,
it's like
did we
half
get
the
it?
price of, we don't know official pricing yet, but even though it's close to half the price of the original R1s, we still have a blinker stock as well as 2 screens.
Okay.
So when you're driving down the road, you're able to see how fast you're going as well as a map in front of you without having to look over to the side like some other EVs have. I feel like the cameras are almost cheap.
Dude, that's really
the other Easter egg. I'll move this water. Is down here underneath the rubber mat. And underneath the rubber storage space cover is a little diagram of all the accessories you can put in this cubbyhole, like a water bottle, knife, lanyard, or a camera. There are a few things that Rivian changed.
No, shit. I didn't want to play this.
Dual glove boxes, storage space. But the front seats do not recline flat anymore. I'll show you the back here in a second. But up here, we have a button to close down all windows at once, as well as another button to close down the back glass. And one of the big additions are these giant wheels that Rivian's calling their haptic angle wheels. The Halo haptic wheels are kind of crazy. Not only are they gigantic on either side of the steering wheel, but they are accessible from both the front and the rear. The left side, you can roll it all the way up and then the dial reaches the electric motor inside of the Halo wheel will change the haptic feedback so that the rotation stops and the dial stops rotating. It feels very much like a physical stop, so I'm very interested in how they accomplish it all with just motors and software, but it gives you a level of control over all the aspects, like changing even the temperature or the power of the air vent without having to reset the digital display. It'll also help control the assistive driving features, like long distance behind bars, as Rivian rolls out their autonomous driving. Before we jump into the back, I do want to show one thing I noticed about this. Rivian is doing the electronic door locks that a lot of manufacturers are doing. So here on the driver's seat, it was just a push button which unlocked the latch over there, and then the emergency exit right here on the door bottle, the latch which physically lets you out of the vehicle. Back here, if you open up this door, it's also digital, no electronic latch, which adding complexity and emergency isn't my favorite thing, so I do wish I had physical latches on all doors. Coming back in here, we have 3 full-size seats, plenty of legroom. This is nice. You can lay down into the window here, and also back here we have a this button right here, which opens up the whole back hatch, so that you can camp out inside with no Velcro Anderson. Here, room for a spare, not a full-size storage, or just plenty of extra storage space. Making our way to the back. We don't know the official tow rating of the R2 yet, but since it's half the price of an R1, I would assume it can tow about half as much. But since it still has the 7-pin adapter, I'm imagining that they've designed it to tow quite a bit. I also like how Rivian's incorporated their logo into the side marker lights, as well as, the turn signals. And the top still has 2 attachment points for the roof racks, which fit the rooftop tent or, kayaks, because it wouldn't be an adventure vehicle without the...
Oh, okay, guys. I thought there was going to be more Drive Syndicate available today, and there wasn't, so I'm cutting it short. Let's see y'all later. Tomorrow, hopefully. I want to keep this going.
Owl in the cowl.
Every day.
I'm told there are several more Easter eggs throughout the vehicle, but they will not tell
we'll get there.
me where they are or what they are.
Oh, that's an incognito window.
Now,
No wonder.
I've owned a Tesla, so it makes me especially qualified to
Tesla
and Rivian's R2, and I'd have
I
to say
like
that
these
the fact that
Rivians, man. I want some.
and additional wheel travel
I
makes it
don't have the
exponentially
money,
smoother on
but
Rivian's R2.
I wish we had them. All right.
I'm
Bye.
impressed that Rivian's made a competent adventure vehicle at half the price of their flagship models. However, one thing